We're going to leave the Temple Mount now and the Mount of Olives and the Antonia Fortress. We're going to go around the corner to the north end of the city and the Damascus Gate. We'll start with a close-up picture of the Damascus Gate at the Holy Land Hotel model. You can see the Temple Mount is just directly beyond it, the Antonia Fortress on the left, and it just lines up perfectly with this picture with the temple itself. And Solomon's portico is on the south there to the right. Now that red circle you see is Calvary, which would be represented by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, outside of the Damascus Gate, but also outside of another gate over closer to that circle as well. Now this is back an aerial view of the Holy Land Hotel model, and the yellow is the Damascus Gate. And we started there at the green circle, which is Jaffa Gate. And these two gates were probably the most used and famous gates of Jerusalem. And they were named because of the destinations to which people would travel from there. The blue to the north goes up to Damascus. And the red to the west would go to Joppa or Jaffa, which was a port city on the Mediterranean. The Apostle Paul took an eventful trip on the road to Damascus. If you watch, starting at the city, the itinerary as I read a passage from Acts. Acts 9. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest in Jerusalem and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, they might take them as prisoners back to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus, as you can see the blue line is right now, on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard that sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. And of course this began the ministry of the greatest missionary of all time on the road to Damascus. Now Joppa, from which you would leave from the Jaffa Gate, also is the site of two very significant events in the scripture. Again, watch the itinerary. In Acts 9, Joppa or Jaffa. In Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, which was translated as Dorcas, who was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa. You can see that if you look really closely on the map. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, "Please come at once." Peter went with them, and when he arrived he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, "Tabitha, get up." She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called to the believers and the widows and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. So this is where Peter raised Tabitha from the dead. Pretty important event in Scripture. There's another one also, quite a long time before this. This is the current city, the modern city of Joppa. It kind of looks like it did 2,000 years ago, I'm sure, but it was much smaller according to archaeologists. Now Jonah left from Joppa, but Jonah 1:3. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now, let's take a look at a map to put all of Jonah's trip into perspective, leaving from Joppa. As you can see, he left the coast of Israel there at the city of Joppa, and he started heading out west into the Mediterranean, but right about where the loop stops, somewhere out there, he ran into a whale. And the whale carried him back to the shores of northern Israel at what would be modern Lebanon today and spat him out somewhere. And then he took that itinerary, that red line, up to Nineveh. Well, guess where Nineveh is? If you superimpose over this map modern country lines, it's kind of interesting. Nineveh is on the Tigris River in the northern province of the country of Iraq, modern Iraq. Well, let's get back to the gate itself. Here's Damascus Gate. Kind of a close-up picture. We're going to compare this with the modern gate. That's the current gate that you would go and see today. Essentially the same size. Take a look at the distance. In the distance, what you'll see. Well, we've kind of done a bird walk to get to show why the gates of the city, especially this Damascus Gate, were named what they were. Let's actually get back to the gate itself. Here's a close-up picture at the Holy Land Hotel of the Damascus Gate. And we'll superimpose the current gate on there, the Suleiman walls, and at approximately the same height and size and everything to show them as close as they can be together. What we're going to focus in on is what's actually beyond these gates to show their proximity to some of the other locations in the city. The Damascus Gate, the origins of the entry into the old city that is today known as Damascus Gate date back to the 2nd century CE, the period of the Roman city. At that time it was triple gates, resembling a triumphal arch, and was probably not attached to the wall. Later, when it was connected to the wall, it was flanked by guard rooms. Impressive remains of the Roman gate still exist, called the Shechem Gate by the Jews. The Arabs remember this gate as the Gate of the Column because the tall pillar that stood in this gate's plaza during the Roman and Byzantine period. I took the picture on the right by climbing to the top of a youth hostel across from Suleiman Road. It's actually from the rooftop of that youth hostel. This is testing this microphone now at the highest setting kilobits possible. There's a definite buzz going on in the background. So I wonder if, I'm going to go turn it off right now on the speaker. I wonder if the buzz is being carried over into the slide presentation. I just turned it off. Did that improve this or not? Maybe that was the problem. The speakers were being kept on. On the model picture, Damascus Gate. On the current picture, you'll see the Mosque of Alask, which is the Temple Mount. Sure enough, in the distance on the left, Temple Mount. Another closer picture of the gate in the model. And now the close-up picture of the current Damascus Gate. Notice there's a gate on the left and a gate down below on the left, and then the main gate that everyone's going through in the picture. The gate down below is actually a much earlier gate than the one up above. It's a Hadrianic arch in the date 117 and 138, and the one up above is an Ottoman arch, AD 1538. Now, if you go down the Via Dolorosa, you will find 3 Hadrianic arches on the Via Dolorosa. Now, this is, what is it, nearly 100 years, 80 years after Jesus was crucified. These were built by Hadrian, not Herod. Herod passed away some 100 years before Hadrian. Let's put it into perspective. The lower Hadrianic arch was somewhere between 117 and 138 when Hadrian was ruling. And then the upper arch that was built later on top of this was in 1538 when the Ottoman Empire was in control, and the Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent built that part of the wall above the Hadrianic arch. That's a spread of about, 1,400 years or so. This is an aerial view of Damascus Gate in the foreground, and you can see the Hadrianic arch to the left of it, below it. This is a nighttime view of Damascus Gate. Notice the dome on the right. That's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which would be Calvary. And then the tower in the middle, I pointed that out as the Lutheran Church tower, from which I got many of my aerial views.